Hey, everybody. Saturday morning. Welcome to a special edition of the Crow's Nest. Today, we're not doing the normal interview while I sit there and pretend to paint something that I never finish. We're going to do a panel on what makes a quality paint job. And let me adjust my camera a little bit. There we go. Have a little crazy backdrop today. It's based on the Crow's Nest. Trasharama developed this up for me. Hey, kids, got a little Saturday morning homage to this. So today joining me, Jen Greenwald, Rhonda Bender,
Hi.
and Derrick Schubert. In no particular order. All have appeared on the Crow's Nest before, so all are returning guests to the show. But I kind of wanted to jump in. All three of the folks on the panel today, including myself, are judges at the MSP Open for ReaperCon. And unfortunately, we're having to do this virtual con crap this time because of the COVID. It's not quite as fun. And we miss seeing everybody together, but this has been a great substitute. We had fun on D&D last night. There's been a lot of great online classes. I don't know about you guys, but this has been the first time in any con that I can remember actually being able to attend a few classes for a change, not just go to my own, go back to the room and pass out and take a nap. But actually go, oh, okay, oh, wow, look at this other class. I caught a class with David Cecil yesterday, with Greg Zuniga, and with Aaron Hartwell. So I don't know if you guys did you guys get a chance to drop in any classes yesterday?
I didn't, I don't know. I was still prepping for mine, so I was being organized.
Well, see, that's what happens when you don't have to prep, then you can attend all kinds of things. When you just show up and go, oh, what am I teaching? Oh, I'm going to teach this. That's fine. Cool. But yeah, what about you, Derek?
I was running a game yesterday for a couple of hours, but I caught Reaper Errant, and I also watched Aaron Lovejoy's airbrush special last night, which was like a class because he was getting into so much detail on the airbrush and the specific Reaper Vex airbrush and then techniques and all kinds of stuff. Airbrush is totally new to me, so that was like an airbrush class as well as a infomercial and a product review all in one.
Are you
a great couple of hours?
Are y'all geeked up to get a airbrush now?
The hype level has definitely gone up. Aaron is a great booster and salesman for the Vex and airbrushing in general.
Yeah, he's going to be the new ShamWow model, I think. All right, Jen, what about you?
No, I didn't have a chance to catch anything yesterday.
Okay, but you were on Reaper Errant.
I was on Reaper Errant.
And that was a lot of fun.
It was fun.
Oh, it was awesome. All right, so the topic of the panel today is what makes a quality paint job. And it's such a broad topic. And so there was a bunch of different avenues to go down there. But for Rhonda, for instance, I'm going to throw you under the bus initially. For you, what when you are looking at a piece or your own piece or anything, whatever, I mean, what are some of the criteria that you're kind of looking at initially to spark your eye so you feel like, because everybody's opinion is different. What I think is a great paint job, somebody else may go, yeah, it's true, or no, I disagree. I like this one better. What are you looking for initially?
Well, I think the big trick, the big bar in a lot of people who want to paint for display, me included, missed this for a long time, is the whole thing where the contrast is important and it has to look good at arm's length to look good on the game table. That is just as true for a display paint job, because when the judges are walking down the row of tables, we're effectively looking at it at the same distance as we would if it was on a game table. So you want to catch our eye there and make someone want to look closer. Or if it's an online contest, you're looking at little thumbnails, and it's the same thing. It's smaller than when you pick it up and look at it close. And it's really, we also know that that's really hard to do, to make something that's eye-catching from a distance, and then you pick it up and you see, craftsmanship and brush strokes and smooth blending and all the freehand and the cool stuff. That still is important, but you need to make me want to take that initial, oh, this looks cool. Can I look at it closer and see if it still looks cool? So
Yeah,
that element,
Jen?
I think a lot of people miss.
No, I think that's super important. Jen, what did you like? Do you like to add anything to that?
Um, yeah, I mean, I agree. It's good to have something that's going to attract attention from a distance, because that's what's going to draw people in to look at the figure more closely. And then when you start getting into the details, I guess one of the things that I look for or try to figure out is, when you're painting a figure, usually you have something in mind that you're trying to achieve, an effect that you're going for, a look that you're going for, or whatever. And so I kind of want to see that sense of intentionality. And did you achieve, or did you achieve what you were aiming for?
Sense of intentionality. I like that. That is really good. I think that's something I want to use going forward too. And that's perfect, because with all of the different art styles, 5, 10 plus years ago, it used to be all just about pretty much the American style of painting was kind of categorized as super clean, super smooth blends. And that's really what it was. And then over the years, especially with a lot of European influence, at least for me, it's opened up to a lot of other approaches. There was the whole F smoothness, approach, and just gritty and whatever. And people jump to that, yet their application of that may not have had a great sense of intentionality to it. I meant to be this way. Well, just being sloppy isn't a style. Execution of that creativeness is the style. So what about you, Derrick?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about whether a figure does something that I've never seen before. And when I'm really pushing myself on competition pieces, that's my goal, is what can I do with this figure that nobody else has done. And so it's going to be the first thing in the world, first thing in the universe that ever does this.
Right.
Never before, and maybe never after, but at least never before. But yeah, that idea of different styles and different people latching onto styles or changing our standards in the art is that's great. That's how art is developing. And when I was in my landscape architecture school, we took a history class, and one of the lessons in the history class was about 100 years ago, when the certain architects were changing their ideas about architecture because there were all these new materials and new social theories and so on available to them. They brought about this new kind of architecture, and it looked different and it felt different. It was this modern architecture, but the people who were doing that, they had this firm grounding in history, and they knew what they were deviating from or trying to change. And then they criticized a lot of the architects who came after them as just imitating form or imitating the superficial aspects of it without understanding without understanding the context. And so when Jen is saying the intentionality or your purpose, and that what you were saying, Michael, about the F smoothness movement, right? Sloppiness is not a style. You have to be aware of what you are trying to do, so then when you do it well, it comes across that was deliberate. But for me, it's something new. What is it about your figure that is going to catch my eye because of its uniqueness?
And I think it's important to note too that just because our definition today for this panel is more from a competition level standpoint. There are quality paint jobs at all levels, from tabletop to just, I'm painting this for myself, it's going in my display case or just going on my shelf and I love it. There's all different levels. And I think we are kind of the approach today that we were wanting to talk about too, is since we can't have an MSP open this year and you can't get that direct feedback, what would be a good avenue for us to kind of provide on a broader scale this feedback? and going down that feedback path, the most common feedback ever given on any miniature ever is you need more contrast. You need higher highlights, deeper shadows. And it's always an issue. And it's like, I tried that. And I think sometimes that as judging teams, we always try to make sure that we're not just focusing on the highlights and the shadows portion of the contrast, though that is super important. You know, the color contrast, the textures, whatever. I'm going to throw this to Jen initially. Jen, what do you think? What is your kind of feedback on leveling up via contrast? I mean, besides the light and dark, this is a broad question. Maybe pick one avenue and say, what are your kind of thoughts on increasing that? Like you said, pop. You're at arm's length. You're walking up to that table. What makes that figure pop to you?
I taught a class on this last year.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm working with people who are still relatively new to painting and getting that, you know, I need more contrast feedback. And, you know, I think we've all heard from people who have gone to, look, I've been trying that. I've been putting, you know, my shadows, I put down to black, my highlights are up to white. You're still telling me I need more contrast. I don't understand. That I definitely think that looking in contrast between colors is a good way to go for people, and also not focusing just on shadow and highlight contrast on specific areas of the figure, but kind of an overall contrast. So if you've got a figure that's a person with, you know, they've got a face and skin regions and hair and whatever they're wearing, you know, maybe you want to see different lightness in those different areas of the figure, as well as between the shadows and highlights.
Rhonda?
Yes, I think actually what Jen picked part of what I was going to say, but even to go back further than that, one of the problems I think we have in our fields, because we're all sort of self-taught, we sort of made this art up as a group. We don't have the same language to discuss it as the kind when Derrick was talking about the architects and the historical thing. They're drawing on hundreds or thousands of years of history, of terminology, of a group of people that have learned to look at a thing the same way. And we've got pockets in different parts of America, pockets in different countries in Europe, and everybody uses different words and they discuss things in different ways. And contrast, there are like literally a dozen different kinds of contrast. But when we say it in the miniature world, we almost always just mean that one thing, the brighter highlights and the deeper shadows. And what Jen is pointing out is it kind of contrast of value between areas. So the skin of the face would be dark, then you'd make the shirt lighter. Like you can see my hair against this shirt. If you were watching when we were playing Reaper Errant last night, you couldn't because I wore a black shirt. Mm-hmm. And if you scale that down to miniature size, you'd be like, well, where does the hair stop and the shirt start? And you couldn't even see that. So it wouldn't matter how many highlights and shots. I mean, you can compensate when you have to do that with different kinds of contrast. If I made the shirt real textured and the hair is really shiny, but you make your life easier if you start off with like, okay, well, if the character has to have black hair because that's what the person in my game said their character looks like, then I'm not going to give them a dark brown shirt. I'm going to give them like a tan shirt or something. Uh-huh. So part of the problem you get is when you get feedback from people and they say it needs more contrast or it doesn't pop, it's not standing out to them, but it doesn't necessarily mean you got to do some detective work. Maybe your shadows and your highlights are fine, but you're not picking the color differences enough. Like as Jen mentioned, so value is one thing, whether something's darker or lighter, but also color. So if my hair was red and I had a green shirt, that's going to be like, wow, right in your face. Mm-hmm. If my hair was red and I'm wearing this pink shirt, that's not going to stand out as much. So there's a lot of different kinds of contrast, and just you're going to reach a point where you're going to be frustrated and you're going to be like, I'm doing what you told me to do. And that's when you have to start figuring out that the person talking to you doesn't always know how to verbalize what you actually need to do. They're giving you clues that something's wrong. You might have to do the detective work to figure out what the thing, like don't always listen what they say the fix is, listen that they say something's wrong, but you might have to do some exploration and experimentation to figure out what the actual solution to your problem would really be.
And just as an aside there, when we talk about increasing contrast and feedback and whatnot, and just so everyone knows, even when I'm working on a piece, I still don't think I'm getting enough contrast. I'll finish it thinking at the time, yeah, I'm working it, I'm doing it. I intentionally, when I'm painting, I like, okay, as I'm working on it, it's probably my number one thought while I'm going through the whole process and my color selection and my highlights and my shadows, am I pushing enough contrast? I'll finish the piece and then I'll look at it and I'm like, damn it. You know, and it's there, but it needs to be there even more. And I see that in everything, all my stuff. I could have done more. I need to do more. I could have done more. So when you get that feedback, at least from my standpoint, take it as, okay, this is where you're at now. This is where we're giving you a goal to reach towards. We're not saying your piece is horrible at all. We're saying this is, if you want to level up, you want to get to that next step. And I think that's what we're all trying to push for, especially when we're trying to enter competitions. But know that at least I feel that, like, God, I could have done better. I need to try. And it just pushes you towards your next piece. What do you think the same kind of stuff, Derrick?
Yeah, and on this notion of what makes a quality paint job, it varies depending on your purpose for the figure, whether it's a tabletop or it's a competition or is it studio, is it something expressly for photography? But like Rhonda was saying, there's so many different kinds of contrast, and that's where the artistry of the painter or the modeler comes in that you can have a figure that is nominally all in dark clothing or a dark outfit with dark hair, dark skin, dark everything as an abstract, like if you were going to describe this figure, how would you say they were dressed? And you may say they're all in black, but as a painter, then we can control what paints we're using and where we're putting the highlights and the shadows so that you can still have a lively, interesting, high quality piece that has contrast of one area from another, because you're simulating textures and reflectivity and bringing in color composition elements from like simulated light of different colored light from one side or another. And so that's where your artistic license comes in, and bringing interest and liveliness and quality to something that on the surface would seem like it's monotonous or boring or whatever, but then it's the artistry brings it to life.
Now, some of the most interesting pieces that I've seen out there are what we would call monochromatic pieces, where it's all, you know, within the tones. And Derrick, you've done them, and Rhonda's done them as well. It's so interesting, because then you're limited within that palette, but the other colors that you bring in, or the other mood or atmosphere, or maybe the touch splash of color, a touch of color, adds to that. I wanted to kind of back up a little bit and kind of go down. Rhonda, you teach a class, leveling up, and you really focus on a lot of little steps, the little nuggets that you can take to help bump you up. And the reason I know so much about this class is one time you were supposed to come to Genghis Khan, and there was a giant snowstorm and you couldn't make it. And then all of a sudden it was like, Michael, can you teach this class? I'm like, I need to take this class, so I'll teach it. What the hell? Maybe I'll learn something while I'm teaching it. And so I had your hand out, and there was just so many good points, but I wanted to take that thought, that idea of the leveling up and the tidbits that help you pop up, and maybe get some examples from each of you. One of the ones that I remember, it was at a Genghis Khan, and Jen Haley was there. And at the time I was just like a noob trying to level up, trying to get better. And I show her my pieces and what can you give me to help me get better? And she gave me a lot of feedback, and a lot of like, you need to work on your brush control was one of the things. But she did say one thing that stuck with me, and I use it, and I've talked about it a million times, but I want to beat it again, is lining. To me, one of the biggest level up things and pushing the contrast was lining. And that's why everybody jokes that my favorite color of paint now is blue liner. And one of Derrick's favorite colors is brown liner, of course. The liner colors are great, and I'm not here to sell any colors, but the lining, separating all the folds. Now, do we in our real lives have lining? Do I have a line between this shirt and my skin? No, but as we shrink ourselves down to the little 28, 32 millimeters, we're losing a lot of that sense of proportion. And although the sculptors have sculpted in the different folds, adding that little line helps pop things and separate, and helps the eye of the viewer, since it's become so small, see the differentiation of that. And that helped me. And if you ever ask any feedback from me, you're going to hear the lining thing. You're going to hear it always. It's just kind of a thing. Even if you've done it really well, I'll tell you did it really well, but I'm going to bring it up. Derrick, can you remember back? I mean, it's been forever ago because you've been a master forever. Was there one thing that somebody told you down the path that helped you level up? Or if you can't, what is the thing the feedback you give the most?
Well, let me take you back when I started painting. Well, I remember leveling up on certain figures because I had applied whatever skill technique I had at the time, and then I realized that something was missing, and so and then I had to puzzle out what was missing and what would improve that figure. When I teach my faces and eyes class, for example, there was one figure that I had whose face was so big, it was just a larger scale figure, that when I painted the eyes with my typical white of the eye, dark of the eye, it looked, the eye was so big on that figure, it looked dead because there wasn't anything more to it. So that's when I put a glint of white in the eye, and that animated the eye. And it was of necessity at that time. But along the way, a lot of my progress was self-taught, because it was long ago and there wasn't this plethora of internet resources and images to aspire to. But my process was about just getting brush control, getting my hand and my brush and my paint to do what I imagined or hoped for them to do, and making sure then that I was doing things as simple as covering all of the primer with paint from every angle, making sure that even in under the recesses underneath that there was no primer showing through, and putting just something as simple as putting a shadow or a dark line in those recesses, so that the figure, there was no bad angle on that figure.
Yeah. One of the biggest feedbacks I got from the very beginning was Doug Jones. I always asked him, and Doug Jones won Slayer Swords, and he used to be a local painter in Colorado. He's still around, but we don't see him very much. He was like, one of the things you're going to do, turn it upside down. I want to make sure you painted everything underneath. And sure enough, all the models I worked all this time, there was like all these spots where I had not put any paint at all. It was just bare metal. It wasn't even primer on it. It was just bare metal at that point. So Rhonda, what's your little tidbit?
I'm actually going to share one that I've been thinking about more recently rather than something from long ago, because I think it would have helped me if I thought about it long ago. The more you can break things up, like if you think we're doing a super complex thing, all these things, like we've just talked about, like 10% of what you think about when you're painting already, and that's already a bunch of stuff. So if you can break things up, so if you can think about your color scheme before you even start painting, do some tests on paper, just do, test something you might want to use for your shadow colors and your highlight colors, do some little swipes on your palette. Think about getting all the undersides. You can paint the dark spots on the undersides before you even start the rest of the paint job. And then if you need to change those colors because you see them while you're painting, you can, but at least you've already covered that. Just the more you can break, because when you're sitting there painting and you're kind of in the zone, it's really hard to think about like all of that stuff that goes into it. Am I getting the values? Am I putting the liner on? All of those things. If you can kind of break it up a little, and then kind of what Derrick was talking about, it starts becoming problem solving and a bit of puzzles. And I sort of like that. So leave your piece somewhere where you can see it. Like I have a shelf that I see on the way to the bathroom. And those of you who know me know I have a tiny bladder, so I see those things a lot. And if something bugs me, if I walk by and I'm like, it just doesn't, I have to think about it. I have to leave that piece there and keep looking at it. I'll stop and pick it up, look at it in different light until I figure out what's not working. Like, is this color just wrong? Did I not get the contrast right? Is it, sometimes I might have to paint a little more on it to tell. You might need more of the complete paint scheme on before you can tell if something doesn't work. But I think when I first started painting, I would be, when it was finished, like, you know, the paint is dry and I walked from my painting desk and I put it in my display cabinet, it was done. And not having that attitude, having the attitude of, you know, look at it again, make sure you did what you wanted to do. You were talking about sometimes at the end, you see that you didn't get the contrast you wanted. I've had that where I've been working, it's midnight, I'm like, oh, I'm like pushing this contrast, this is awesome. And I wake up in the morning and I go to the bathroom and I look and I'm like, what? There's no contrast. Like, what happened?
You were delusional.
Yeah, I don't consider it done, because I would consider a stage done too. It's like, okay, I did the face. I don't even need to think about that anymore. I don't even look at the face again until the end. When I stopped having that attitude of this is a done job, the willingness to go back and forth helps blending. It helps the overall paint job. It sounds horrible and like you're never done and like you're just wrestling with it, but I just think of it as you're problem solving.
That's
tweaking.
Yeah, no, it is. It's like, I like the puzzle reference because a lot of times it is a puzzle. All right, so I do this piece now. How's the next piece fitting with the existing pieces? And you know, I like this potential next piece I might include, but for me to include that, I now have to alter what I did before so that all unifies together. And the thing of putting it down and then coming back to it the next day is so important, because sometimes you get this tunnel vision, and I'm the same way, Rhonda. I kicked ass tonight. This piece is awesome. It's the best thing I ever did. I wake up, go down, look at it again. I'm like, oh, that's total crap. I don't know what I'm thinking. I got to start over. Why am I even painting anymore? Something like that. What about
it can go the other way. When you're having a night and you're frustrated and you think it's horrible, like you just spent 2 hours working on freehand for the first time, do not paint over it at midnight. Put it down, walk away, go to sleep, come back before you decide it was horrible, because it probably wasn't as horrible as you think it is.
That's true too. That's definitely true. Jen?
So I guess I have one thing to add to Rhonda's, you know, put it down, come back and take a look at it later is another way to get that kind of distance to be able to evaluate what you've done is take a picture of it. Look at the picture, because I can't even count how many times I've worked on my figure for the day. Okay, the day's done. I got my pictures to put up on my blog, and then I'm looking at the picture going, oh, I completely missed this bit that I thought was done. Okay, well, I guess I'll do that tomorrow. So
you can flip the picture too to kind of get a new view of the figure.
So if you're trying to get a little bit of distance back from the work to evaluate it, try picture. As far as specific painting tips, I don't think I really have a specific technique or tip or anything like that. What I do have is paint more. If you want to improve, you are not going to improve by taking a couple classes and then going, okay, that was cool, and going home and, binge watching Daredevil for the next month or whatever. You have to actually spend time painting things, try the techniques you learned. It's okay if it doesn't work the first couple of times. It probably isn't going to. That's fine. Keep working.
No, and I agree with that. And normally at ReaperCon, you've got to pay for your classes, and you go in and you take all these classes. I hear of folks taking 4 or 5 classes, and I did that on my first ReaperCons as well. But if you spent this money and you invested that time in taking the class, it's just not going to all of a sudden be in your brain. And now I can do it. I took that Shade of Metallics class, and now I can rock that the rest of my life. It takes practice. And Jen, you hit it. It takes time. We went to the Sergio class, Rhonda and Jen and I, and he really blew our minds with a lot of techniques and a lot of loose painting, yet intentional loose painting is probably the way I would explain his style to a certain degree. And the same thing happened when I took Alfonso's class, color theory class. All of this information and just blew my mind and rocked my world. And actually I felt after I took the class, I leveled down a tiny bit. I'm like, oh my God, my mind is blown. But it took thinking about it and practicing the thoughts and whenever you take a class, I think it's important to take what the instructor said and then make it yours. Interpret it through your processing, through your filter of your brain. And maybe that's just the way my brain works. I've got to filter it through this convoluted mess of my brain and apply it to and make it into your style. I think it helps me understand it a little bit more, to try to translate that into it. Do you agree, Derrick?
Yeah. And thinking about my history of painting, and each of us has had a process in our career of painting, where we started and how we got into it and how we got to where we are now. And probably each of us has changed the way we approach painting at least once along our process. So when Rhonda talks about putting something down for the night, or waiting to see how it's going to look when you do the next step of your process, that the juxtaposition and the composition can really affect how you perceive what you've done. And one big change that I've made over my span of painting is that I used to paint one thing to completion, paint the cloak to completion before moving on to the boots, and do the boots to completion, and then the pants and so on. And I guess I had this idea of what I was trying to achieve with each one, so that I knew when it was done and when it was time to move on to the next. But one thing that I do much more now is put paint on everything and work the highlights and shadows and contrast on everything and ratchet it all in as a whole, so that there's no big like white primer or black primer or unpainted area, but it's all, I can get a sense for the whole figure together as a whole. But I think, as you say, make it your own. Different painters will paint in different ways. So some people need that paint the cloak to completion before I move on to the next thing. Others will be more comfortable with a more free form. Well, let's get paint on here and here and here. Let's have a whole bunch of colors on my palette, and I'll be working all over this figure at once. And it's never going to, there's going to be no part of this figure that's done until the whole figure is done. So different people, just mindset or approach to sort of levels of chaos and order in their lives that they want to bring that into their hobby as something that they embrace, or that they can control, or whatever their mindset is. Then it'll vary from person to person.
And I've been looking through some of the comments and stuff, and one of them was, it takes time sometimes to paint that top level, your best executed piece. Don't rush it. Let it happen. There has been pieces that I've spent 20, 30 hours on, and then they went to the shelf and they sat there for a few weeks, a month plus. And then I picked them up and they get another 30, 40 hours. Sometimes that piece isn't talking to you. And it's hard if you're doing a commission piece and you have to get it finished. I get that, but set that aside, and for your own personal growth and development, or your I want this piece to be the super high level piece. If it's fighting you and you're not feeling it, don't necessarily, you can push to try to get there, and that's good. But if it's still fighting you, maybe set it aside, give it some space, let it breathe, and let it come back to you, and let it tell you sometimes, and maybe it's a little cheesy, but let it tell you what it wants. Sometimes I feel like I'll look at it and the idea will come, and where did it come from? It came from it. It told me that it wanted to be painted this way as well. But with that, I think the other thing I was thinking about with all you're saying, when you guys were talking, was I will paint stuff for competitions, for commissions, but then there's a number of things I just paint just for the hell of it, just for me. And you won't see, most people won't even see the final results of it. And they're just what I call just for fun pieces, just pieces so I can just creatively let go. And maybe I'm practicing something. I've been practicing a lot of NMM lately, and just trying to refine your thing. Do you guys do that as well? Do you take some time just for fun pieces or goof around pieces or whatever? Let me. I will pick Jen Greenwald for the question, please. In the upper left corner, Jen Greenwald for the win.
That's actually most of what I do, because for me, painting is a hobby. Mm-hmm. It's not my primary source of income. It's something that I do for fun. So if I'm not doing commission work, or I'm not doing something that is supposed to, go to somebody for a specific purpose, it's something that I'm painting for myself, for practice, or to try something out, or because I feel like it, or whatever. And then when competition season rolls around, what I do is I look at what I've worked on and go, okay, I like that one, that one, that one, and that one. Great, that's going to be my competition stuff this year. So I do that a lot.
Mm-hmm. That's another thing too. I think, and we're going to jump onto this question after I get Rhonda and Derrick's input on the fun pieces. Is we're going to go towards competition pieces too. So don't let me forget to do that. But Rhonda, you just painted off your awesome and submitted it to Frank, your Reaper Errant D&D piece. It was so nice to finally see her.
I know, she's like a real person now. I actually wanted to go back to something you said earlier about classes and studying. Sure. I think a lot of people out there, I know I fell into this category. A lot of the people that are studying miniature painting were good students, and they tended to be good students in intellectual fields, or you work in something like the sciences or engineering, things like that, where there's right answers and there's wrong answers. So you pass the test or you failed. Art is not like that. It's a physical, there's a physical component. So what Michael said about, okay, so I studied shaded metallics and now it's in my brain. It doesn't matter just about your brain. It matters what's in here too, and how your brain is communicating with your hands. So I think one of the problems that people create for ourselves as artists is you sit down to practice and the first time you do it, it sucks. And that's okay. You did not fail. You're learning. It's like cooking. It's like, imagine you were teaching a child to cook. Like, you wouldn't start with, chicken cordon bleu or something. You'd be like, here's how you fry an egg. And they might get it wrong. Like, they're not going to make a perfect over easy. They're going to break the yolk. And then they're going to learn from that. They're going to be like, oh, well, if I touch that before it sets, that breaks the yolk. So you're often going to learn more when you do the screw ups about how to make it work for you, how to turn it into yours. So I think a lot of us create problems for ourselves by having this idea. And even when you're our level, like we went and took that class with Sergio, we've been doing what we do for 10, 20 years, depending amongst us. So you're real set in your ways, and it's even harder to take what someone else says and do it their way. And you're going to suck even more in some ways. Just because you're good at some of it, it doesn't mean I'm going to sit down and be able to pick up my brush and do anything that anyone else shows me. And I'm certainly not going to be able to do it in the time frame. They're going to be like, burp, burp, burp. And I'm going to be like 4 hours later. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you're bad at this. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. You don't know how to learn. It's learning a different way than I have knowledge and now I can tick the correct box on the multiple choice test.
So after you finished Sergio's class, Rhonda, did you intentionally go back and work on that model and try to apply some of his thoughts? Or I
didn't go back and work on that model. I took some new figures and worked on them, and they failed. Like I thought it was that thing where you thought you did the contrast. It's like I sat down and I thought I did the Sergio thing, and I woke up the next day and I'm like, no, I did my thing. This is not the Sergio thing. And I had to like what I did looked great. A lot of people said, oh, it looked good. But it didn't do what I wanted. And I didn't learn what I wanted. So I actually painted over it and did it again, even though it looked okay.
Yeah, he said
the point wasn't to look okay, it was to figure out what he's doing.
No, and that was the same thing. It was even during the class, he would come by and say, Michael, it looks good, but that's what you do. Do what I do. And it was, I'm not paying you to do my own style. I'm paying you so I can learn something new. But it was just, you fall into that and you have to consciously think about that. Derrick, we can talk about the minis for fun or whatever, continue down this path, whatever you'd like.
I'm thinking of a seminar I went to at a convention a couple of years ago by Mike Selinker, the game designer, and he was talking about the theory of games as a safe place to fail
Mhm.
in our lives, and we're doing it for fun to learn different ways of thinking, different ways of applying our brain power. But that's a safe place to fail, and have to give yourself permission to have a paint job that may be different from or worse than you hoped or you imagined, but that's fine, because you're still going to learn something from it, and you're going to apply that to the next thing. And giving yourself permission to do things just for fun, just as an experiment. And if it doesn't work out, that's going to be fine, because it was about the process that you had doing that thing, and not necessarily about a result.
I totally agree. Now, I wanted to go back around to Jen's comments and I wanted to talk a little bit about entering for competitions, not us judging, but when we're prepping to enter a contest. So when you're going to a con and there's various categories that you're going to enter, maybe manufacturer awards or whatever, the approach that I used to take back when I was first starting, I'm like, okay, what are the categories? And I'm going to paint specifically for this con, and I'm going to do it really quickly. And I got a month to crank out all these miniatures, and I'm gonna da. And I'd show up and I'd maybe do okay, but not do as well as I had hoped. And then one year I was like, screw it. I'm just going to paint all year. And like Jen exactly said, it came time for the con, and I went to my shelf and I said, all right, what did I have done and what I'm most proud of? And I grabbed a couple of things and I took them to the con, and they did really well. Do you guys which approach do you normally take when you were like focused in on like, I'm jamming for ReaperCon and I want to go for a Sophie? Or you like, I'm focused on this? Or you, Derrick, I'm gonna run to you first, since you have this giant shelf of trophies behind you, and you're super accomplished. You knew I was gonna go there at some point.
Yeah, well, so there was a span of years when I painted things specifically for the competitions that I expected to enter them into.
Mm-hmm.
And so like when Crocodile Games had its Croc Sword, the Crocodile Games Manufacturers Award at Gen Con, there was a year when I said, I don't know, woke up one day and said, this year I'm going to win the Croc Sword. And so it was about choosing the model and making the paint job and doing something that would stand out, making that competition entry that would be unlike anything the judges and the public had ever seen. And I spent a lot of effort coming up with the idea and then painting it, executing it, and indeed it paid off, and I won the Croc Sword that year because it was the figure.
What was your on that individual piece? What was your prep time, lead time? What was your total invested time from inception of idea all the way through execution? How much time did you give yourself prior to the con?
I think I started about a month out, maybe 2 months out, but I planned to spend at least 20 hours a week of painting, and it was probably an 80 or 100 hour figure that year. And that was the most time that I had spent and have spent since then on any figure. But recognizing what the reality is of how much time you can spend on a figure based on your work schedule, your life schedule. Do you have 1 hour a night or 2 hours a night, or can you binge paint for 12 hours each day on a weekend, or what's it going to be like? And then count on 40 or 50 or 60 or 100 hours for your competition entry, so that if you're leaving for the convention on Wednesday, it's not Monday 2 days before, and you figure somehow I could spend 60 hours on this figure when the clock only gives me 48, and I need to sleep and eat and work and socialize.
And you're in the bathroom at the hotel room finishing up your paint job.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Rhonda?
My relationship with contests and how I enter them has really changed a lot.
After you beat me every time we enter in the same category, but that's okay. Go ahead.
Well, in the initial years, I did often paint something specifically for a contest, and I used it to push me to paint. Like I hadn't developed good habits about painting regularly and sitting down and painting. And I was a very, I hadn't learned that lesson about it's okay to fail. So I was a very timid painter. I would paint something and be like, well, I don't want to ruin it. I don't want to try freehand now at the end because I like the rest, and then I would ruin it. Because why couldn't I just repaint the dress if the free? I don't know. It didn't occur to me. But contests would push me to do that because it's like, well, I got to do something, or it's just going to be another boring figure in the case. So I guess I'll finally try OSL or freehand or transparent cloth or whatever thing. So I used it as a spur for that because the deadline would make me paint, and the sense of competition would make me try new things. But I always go to contests with the attitude, I can control what I brought. I have no control over what else happens. So it could be my best work. It could be like amazing, but if 3 other people with super amazing work show up, I'm still not going to win. And I have to be okay with that. So I've never gone with that expectation of I've leveled up and now I'm going to get all the things and the recognition, and because you're just setting yourself up to be miserable and disappointed and then not enjoy the rest of the event. I also always like to be done with the painting. There's only one contest I've ever painted in the hotel room for. Because I just hated one part so much. So I was like, nope, I got to fix it.
And sometimes that's the hardest thing to swallow and I've got a piece, my Don't Be Sad piece, that probably want to, anybody's asked me, and people have asked me, what's your favorite thing you ever done? And that was still to this day, probably my favorite piece. I did that in the intention of taking it to Crystal Brush, and I entered it in diorama, and it's probably still one piece I'm most proud of. It didn't make the cut. It was a little soul crushing to me that it didn't even make the cut. Now, it ended up going to ReaperCon and winning Best Show, and it was awesome. I was super excited about it and whatever, but judging is subjective, and when I look back at it, I think we should have made the cut, but there was no way it was going to hit first, second, or third because the quality of entries in that category was just so strong. So you bring your top-notch piece, you bring your best piece. I had to learn the lesson at that time of that I was proud of that piece, and regardless of how it did at Crystal Brush, I still needed to remain proud of it. And there was a brief period of time where I was, this piece sucks. No, it didn't. It was still my favorite piece, and I didn't want to be bitter towards it because it didn't have any choice of how good I did on it. I did my best. But so you do your best. You have fun in it. You pour yourself into it. But knowing that judging is subjective and you can't control what, especially when it's a first, second, and third. Who else shows up with whatever badass piece? Rhonda or Derrick or Jen could show up something, and I might finish fourth. It's just the story of things. Jen, you're still heavy in the competition circuit.
Not so much.
Give us a little bit.
So like I previously said, at this point, if I'm going to a show and there's going to be a competition, I'm going to enter it. I don't usually make stuff for competition anymore. I used to. I think the last time I did something, well, no, I didn't even do that specifically for competition. A couple of years ago, I decided, well, I at least want to enter something in, not necessarily all in the same year, but over the years, do all of the categories in ReaperCon, except for ordnance, because I prefer organic.
No, now you got to do ordnance. This is your dream. Now you got to do ordnance.
I want to see a tank from you.
It's my dream. I can decide whether it has to include ordnance or not.
My dream. Don't make me do it. Yeah.
But the last category I did was open, because I don't do sculpting really. I don't do a whole lot of conversion. So the piece that I ended up putting in open that year was, does everybody remember Charlie?
Yes. That was a D&D game we were playing. It was awesome.
Yes, we were playing a D&D game where one of the characters I played died colorfully by falling into a pit trap and then getting squashed by giant rocks falling down from the ceiling.
Uh-huh.
So what we were doing, we were all at Reaper, and we would play our games in the evening, and then the next day, a lot of people would, paint a figure or hack together a figure to represent something memorable that happened the previous night. Like that's where the lightning bear came from.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I grabbed, a piece of a stone column and cut a hand off of some figure that had a sword in it and just jammed them together and painted it. And there we go. There I have immortalized the death of Charlie. So that was my open entry for ReaperCon that year because it was converted.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, so I got a bronze for my piece. I did the whole write-up. I did the whole story of who the character was and why he died with the pictures of how I put everything together.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my point is it doesn't necessarily have to be the best figure ever to be worth putting in competition. Because sometimes, just making the judges smile can get you some points.
No, yeah, two things there. I mean, fun, we're always looking for fun. And there's, at ReaperCon, there is a bunch of different categories, but one of them is the Mouseling Award. And there's a special trophy that you can win, the Gene Van Horn sculpted the Napoleonic mouse riding the horse. It's awesome. But the reason we came up with that category is Reaper produced and Gene had sculpted a ton of mouselings, and we would say, hey, you really can't. Can you win a Sophie with a mouseling? And Mark Maxey actually proved that is true because he did it. But we were like, God, if maybe we come up with some new categories. And then I can't remember who did the piece. If someone in chat can remember it, there was a piece called Drive It Like You Stole It. And it was some mouselings on a moon car jumping through the air, going off this thing. And the execution was good. It wasn't, like, oh my God, showstopper execution. But the thought and the idea was just so original and so fun that piece alone was like, we got to make a category for mouselings because there's so many fun, interesting little characters. We want to see what people if they can do this without any inspiration to come up with this, let's see what they can come up with in the grand scheme and go down that path. So yeah, like Jen, like your Charlie piece. I mean, those, from a judging standpoint, those are a lot of fun. Now let's just continue down since we've gotten there. We're not actually doing the MSP Open this year, but for next year, for people getting prepped and ready to roll, excuse me, on judging, we have three main categories. We have painters, right? And then we have open, and then we have diorama. Derrick, since you are the captain Derrick of the open division of judging for ReaperCon, and you are the skater among us, the painter / sculptor. Kind of in a nutshell, we really, when someone is looking to enter into the open division, sometimes there's a lot of confusion on what qualifies for open and what scores the best. And, if you're a gymnast and you're doing all the routine, where are we getting our perfect 10s from when we enter into open?
Yeah, well, the open is the category where you show off your modeling skill, and any piece that's going to be an open entry has to be different from the figure that came out of the package in some way, and it's the place where you can show off your vision. And like I was saying before, it's going to be something that no one has seen before. And when we all judge competition pieces, we're thinking about different aspects of the figure and weighting them differently. So a figure that's going to score high in open still needs to be painted well, but it can score a gold, highest marks in open without the painting alone being gold level. And the way it does that is because of its originality, because of the execution of the sculpting and the conversion, because of the composition. And so if somebody has never entered the open category before, then you can aim deliberately for it. Take a figure and maybe you want to do something as simple as changing one weapon to another, or changing the head of one figure for the head of another figure. that will qualify your figure to be an open entry in the contest the next year, because it's different from the figure that came out of the package. But it won't score as high as a figure where you've taken just the head of one figure, but you've completely sculpted a new body, or put it onto, done a whole lot of conversion and original sculpting or combining of pieces. But don't be daunted, don't be put off by the notion that if you're not a sculptor, or you're not an experienced converter, that you cannot or should not enter the open category. Enter something in open and see how it does, because if you're already a good painter, you're already you're that far along with your open entry of having the good solid base of painting, and then you can work on your sculpting, you can work on your composition, work on your conversion. And maybe the first year you enter open, you get a bronze. Maybe the next year you decide to work more on your conversion and your sculpting, you get a silver the next year. So it can be a way of pushing you. I sometimes imagine everybody's painting abilities as like this blob in space that's reaching out in different directions, and one pseudopod might reach out toward the blending nebula, and another blob might reach out toward the color theory quasar over there. And so the space of your art is constantly growing and shifting, and just what are you going to focus on at one point? Where are you going to reach next? You can't reach everywhere all at once, even if you are a omnipotent blob. I
didn't know we were getting all metaphysical during this.
Yeah, that's right.
Good. I like this path. Yeah.
So, but you'll choose what you wanna reach for and stretch and grow. What your workout for a given span of time is going to be. What muscles are you going to flex and build up with a given piece?
Uh-huh. Our two other, well, there's ordnance as well, but none of us are really massive ordnance painters. So I'm going to kind of skip over that category for this panel. We have painters and then diorama. I'm probably the most experienced in diorama, even though Rhonda's beat me a couple times in the diorama category. Still bitter about that. So with diorama, and Aaron Lovejoy is our captain for that judging team, and Ian Markham, and I believe Tish is on the team generally as well. But with diorama, and it is, for me, and looking at dioramas and judging it, to me, it's like what stands out and how does a story, can I see a story in the piece? Is there something, a message that's being conveyed? To me, that's the number one thing. And like Derrick said about the open, sometimes if the conversion is there and the thought and the process and open, that might bump it up higher than something that maybe was painted a little bit better by comparison, but the overall execution of the idea of the category was there. I've seen things in diorama where that story was just so strong and so powerful that, yeah, maybe the paint execution, which is still important in the judging, that story beat out another one that was maybe paint a little bit better, but its story was really weak. And it didn't make it up that way. So for diorama, go crazy, tell a story, make the judges laugh, have fun with it. I mean, one of my last piece that I was able to enter for Sophie was "Where's My Gold?" And that was the frost giant yelling at the snow rabbit. And he says, "Where's my gold?" And I have to give props to Ali Lou that helped me with the name of it. And because behind the piece, he's yelling at this little rabbit, and the rabbit's like cowering, and the rabbit has the hole, and he's got all this treasure in the hole, and all his little rabbit friends are sorting through the treasure. But it was just a standard piece. I didn't do any conversions at all. Built up a little snow base with another little rabbit, but it was the name of the title of the piece. And I would strongly suggest to titles of pieces are add to, especially on the diorama side. Maybe you want to, but you've got to not just title it, but tell that story within. The title should link to whatever the story is as well. But humor is great. Just a battle is nice and stuff, but adding a little extra component, an extra little component of sadness or melancholy or whatever, I think is super important. You guys want to add anything from your takes when you look at dioramas? And that I'm
not just humor, any emotion, making people feel or think or see something from a different view that they might not have thought of.
Right.
Being sympathetic for the villain or something and things like that.
And the other thing too, and I've noticed this with dioramas, you may initially start with a composition size about yay big. Condense it as much as you possibly can. Get it into the smallest window. Eliminate as much negative space as possible when you're setting a scene between characters, because maybe in the real world or whatever, the two combatants might be this far apart. Put them closer together. It's going to add a little more tension, a little more drama to the scene. And then, because when we see a diorama piece on the table, that tension, that interactiveness is just so much more impactful when they're closer together. When you have that negative space, that negative space kind of zaps the energy potentially from the piece, is the way I guess I would explain it if I'm going to go down the metaphysical route. Well,
you have a really good piece of advice for that think of it as a movie poster.
Yeah.
So you're not trying to make the scene where it looks real. You're trying to make the poster that makes you want to go see the movie.
That is some excellent advice. No, take that movie poster where they're trying to sell you on that idea as you walk by the movie theater. You need to see this movie because of this, and it's an action movies do it the best, and they throw all this stuff together. Well, that wouldn't have all happened, but what is in that scene? The other thing too, my last little thing, and I'm going to pass it around again, is Easter eggs. I love Easter eggs. I love to put little tidbits in the piece that if you spin it around and you look at it, and I do this not only in diorama, which is super important for, but any piece, even your painter's piece, add little bits of interest to keep the viewer moving around. And maybe it's a bit of interest related to the figure itself, but add little things to, like, person turns it around. Oh, it's just the back of the figure. Make there be a payoff when they turn it around. Yeah, they spent the time to look at the back. Oh, there's this other little kind of tiny little vignette scene going on. And that was like, where's my gold? There was all the little rabbits playing with the gold underneath. Is it super integral to the piece? No. You could have conveyed everything on the top scene, but if there's that extra little bit that gives that little pop, and for the judging team, it's like, make us remember your piece. Make us go, oh yeah, I remember seeing there's a big long table of entries. I really like that one. Okay, now what was my favorite one in that? You know what? That one at the bit, when we looked at that was funny, or that was like so emotionally impactful. I was like, I had to go back to that one again. Rhonda, what do you think? You're a diorama expert.
I'm like the worst at diorama. I have mastered making them really small. That is.
Yes, you have.
Yeah. I will do dioramas on 50mm basis where I can't even find them in the case. I'm like, oh, where'd my diorama go? Oh, there it is.
Right.
But I have actually won with my tiny dioramas, so it is possible to do. And definitely, I think compressing the story. And this goes back to what you were talking about with lining, which does sort of happen in the real world, but that's a different story. People get really caught up in realism. First of all, photorealism, photos don't even work like the human eye does. So photos aren't even realistic if that's what your level of realism is. Then you look at our sculpts, if you look at the proportion of an actual person to the proportions of what a sculpt looks like, people are 7.5 heads tall. An average figure, I think, is about 5 heads tall. Derrick can confirm or deny. So it's already not realistic. The ankles are wider and the wrists are wider because it can survive the casting process. So just calm down about realism.
Mm-hmm.
Feeling realistic is more important than making something that looks 100% realistic. So, and making it interesting is more important than all of those things. So don't feel like you're doing a joust and the guys have to be this far apart, because that's how a joust works. First of all, that's not the most interesting moment in a joust. The interesting moment is when they're intersecting. So figure out the most interesting moment of your action, of your story, and how you get the characters interacting and more connected. And then cheat if you need to, because we've all been to a con where you see like this giant, it's an inn and there's 6 rooms and 400 figures. And it's cool and it's neat that someone did that work, but you're more likely to remember something like you're talking about, the giant versus the rabbit, if that was in the same competition, you're more likely to remember that and feel more of the emotional impact than just a lot of space and a lot of stuff for dioramas.
Jen?
So I guess briefly building on Rhonda's point about realism and it's not really going to look realistic, and that's okay. I would personally, I avoid snow bases because I have never seen people argue more vehemently about anything in the painting world than they argue about what snow looks like.
Especially people that don't even really know what snow is.
Yes.
Yeah, two of us
I've
can't
seen
really
that.
participate as much.
Yeah.
Yes. I live in a place where we have snow 4 to 6 months a year. I do not like these arguments. I don't do snow bases.
Yeah.
So, I guess another thing that I would recommend thinking about if you're going to do diorama, because it's something that I struggle with every time, is perspective. And I'm talking about perspective of the viewer into the scene. And the fact that unless you take care to control what angles it can be viewed from, and that's something that you can do with the diorama, you don't necessarily know what angle the viewer is going to be looking at it from. So it needs to be interesting from multiple viewpoints. And you need to make sure that however you present your main viewpoint, you are seeing, people are going to see what you want them to see. I have a whole string of dioramas that are all terrible.
It's not true at all. It's not true in the least. But go ahead.
The way they are laid out is there's guy 1 over here, and he's talking to guy 2 over here. And so if you look at it, you can see this perspective or this perspective, and it's not awesome. It means that all of the interaction between those characters is kind of blocked off from the viewer. It means that from whatever angle you're looking at, probably you're going to miss some of the better parts of the paint job if you've focused on a figure's face. So, think very carefully about how you want to place everything and present that scene so that you can have the interaction between the characters that are in there being displayed and visible to the viewer.
No, those are good. I mean, it is hard when you're trying to create a diorama, you're trying to tell a story, that it's a 3D piece. And sometimes we struggle with that. And I think there's been kind of this trend, and I've seen with a lot of painters will create walls or create shadow boxes. And that'll help focus your scene a little bit more. And that's definitely, I think it's a really cool idea. It's a good avenue. That's a little bit newer to our little painting world. It's been around for a long time on the historical side and what have you. But that's another kind of focus and create walls or other kind of scenery to help block in, to help funnel a piece. And that's going to tie into our last category, which is our biggest entered category is painters. And we all end up judging in painters. And I think in a lot of ways, it's the most confusing category too, because you're being judged on your skill and your technique and your execution mostly. But there's a lot of creativeness that goes on as well. So I'm going to, Rhonda is another captain within our judging team. And I wanted, yes, Derrick. Your hand is raised, Derrick. May we go to you, please? Yes.
One thing,
bottom right for the block. Yes.
One thing to say about diorama, when Jen and Rhonda were talking about the composition of figures, as the painter, as the modeler, you need to think about what the figures are that you're starting with, what the figures are that come in the package, and then how you can combine them or juxtapose them. Izzy Talon Collier, Reaper's primary concept artist, has talked about and thought a lot about character design and the spectrum between a dynamic pose or like a static or an attitude pose. So the figure that you bought to represent your role-playing game character may be standing in isolation as their pose, like having a cocky attitude. But if you want that same character to be a character in your diorama, then standing there with a cocky pose isn't necessarily telling the most exciting story in relation to another character. Like the moment of the joust where the jousters are coming together, that Rhonda's example, there may not be you wouldn't buy the figure that is of the horse being, or the rider being blasted off their saddle by the lance. You're going to have to convert it, or you're going to have to repose, you may have to resculpt. And so when you're coming up with a diorama entry, you're going to need to tailor your idea to the figures you can already buy if you're not that much of a modeler. Or if you're an experienced modeler, then you'll figure out a way to convert or scratch sculpt to match a more unique vision that you have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. No, that was a good addition piece. But so our last category, painters, and this is always the one. Like I said, we get the most entries in, and we probably get the most feedback requests. This is something that, because painting is the root of all of this. Rhonda, I mean, when you're judging a painting piece, kind of go through in somewhat summary of your criteria of what you're thinking at when you're looking at this piece.
So some of it is a little bit the opposite of what Derrick was talking about, where they're really looking at the holistic thing in open, and the sculpting and the conversion and things you might have done on the base. All of that is super important. That kind of counts in painters, but I think it adds up to about 15%, because we actually have a breakdown by percentages of things that we're looking at. So it helps, and definitely sort of in terms of presentation and preparation, like mold lines are not a good look in any category, but even though it's a small part of painter, it still counts. Like having the guy floating a little bit above the base on his pin, instead of, it looks like his foot's connected to the ground and he's really got weight and gravity's affecting him. All of those things count, but mostly we're going to be looking at the selection of colors, does the choice of color and the style that you've used match the kind of character that you're trying to portray, match the sculpting of the kind of character that you're trying to portray. And there's really a lot of it is about craft and technique and the level of that. So it's sort of balancing the artistic elements with that element of craft. And I think that's part of what people like about our hobby, because when you talk about fine art, people get upset about, how can I just paint a stripe of blue and the museum buys that for $2 million? And I'm with you. I get you, people. I don't like that either. In studying traditional art, I've gone to some shows and stuff, and they have something they call conceptual art, and it's really just like the idea, and there can be awards for that, and it can look like a kid scribbled it out, but if it was the best concept, it wins a prize. We don't do that in miniature painting. So having the idea is important, and it's great, but we also have a minimum expectation of craft, and that's where you start to go up the levels. So you don't, I mean, if you're mainly painting for games and you just want to put your best pieces in and stuff, that's great. Please do that. We enjoy seeing the pieces of all levels, but if you've been hanging around, upper level bronze or silver, and you're starting to wonder why you're not pushing up, and you're hearing Michael and Derrick talk about putting 30, 40, 70 hours into a piece, that's where you're starting that's the kind of stuff that starts happening at gold level. So it's not that the artistic side doesn't count, because that's where I suck. So when because Michael thinks that I've won all these prizes over him, and I feel like he's won all these prizes over me. So because he's awesome at that stuff. He has these visions for these characters and these ideas for these stories. And I do not, I'm a very technical painter. There's not enough emotion. There's not enough story in my work. I don't spend enough time thinking about that stuff. I'm just like, well, I want to paint shiny hair and I want to explore freehand and stuff. And that doesn't make people feel things when they look at it. I'm starting in the middle, and I should be going back a step and thinking about the character and thinking about the story. So the dream is to do both, to be super amazingly technical. And by technical, I don't mean blending and smoothness is the only thing. The whole smoothness thing that Michael was talking about. I think sloppy is not a style is important. So there was a piece that was painted as if it was Van Gogh. It was a bust that was painted as a Van Gogh with a lot of brush strokes and different layers of colors and stuff. But the person did that, as Jen said, with intention. You could tell that's what they were trying to do. They executed it well. They were still putting paint exactly where they wanted it. They were just putting the paint exactly where they wanted it in a different style. We had a piece last year where the person did cell shading, and it was amazing. And we could tell right away it wasn't like, oh, they didn't put enough contrast in. It's like, oh no, they're doing like a 3D comic panel. They're doing cell shading. This is super cool. It's one of the things I remember most from seeing last year. So I think sometimes people will, maybe take a class or go to a workshop or a Patreon thing and not get that connection, that it just because it's a different style, that doesn't make it easier. Like just because you can't do blending, it's like, oh well, now I can just slap some paint on and call it F smoothness. I mean, I get the impulse, and I do think that there are segments or times in our hobby where things have been a little slow, where it's like there were probably years where only NNM1 stuff or only smooth blending was considered important. But certainly at our contest, the style doesn't matter. It's the intent. Like, what are you trying to do, and how well did you do what you're trying to do? Your vision for the piece. Like, our first thing, and this Michael gives us this advice every year when we start to judge, is this the best version of this piece that you can imagine? We're not trying to take points off. We're trying to look for the things that gave it the best qualities. Then there are going to be like, oh, here's some old lines and the guy's floating. Like, we have to acknowledge that. Right. But we're not starting off at, okay, we're starting at 0, convince me this is good. We're starting off at, hey, I think this is good. Is there anything that's holding me back a little from saying this is the best version of this?
Yeah, and the way, so we've been talking about Sophie's and ReaperCon entries, but the other category, the main one we have, is the MSP Open, where you can get a gold, silver, and bronze, and we've referred to that a few times. I'll have a discussion, and this is the way that I judge, and I give it out to the feedback every year to the judging teams. And for the people who have been judging this entire time, I'm sure you're sick of me saying it every year, but I'll say, as I'm judging a piece, I'll look it up, and most of the times I'll pick it up, and I need a starting point in my own mind, and I will start with most pieces at a silver or even high silver in my mind. This is going to be. Now I look at it and say, when I'm looking at this, oh, no, this piece, for this reason, and this reason, has moved it up to a gold in my mind. Or the other way, it's like, oh, there's a few things that they missed, and maybe it'll knock it down to a bronze. And that's kind of the way I do it. Everybody, of course, has their own little way of judging, but for me, that helps me at least give me a starting point where I need to be. I'm not starting at either, like Rhonda said, starting at 0, and you've got to prove that you can make it to 100, or some people would start at 100 and they start looking for demerit marks and knock it down. If you start looking that way, you're gonna knock stuff down all the way. I'm also looking for, not just for technical stuff, but which is important, good blends, good sense of intention. I think that should be the theme of this show. A good sense of intention for that. But also, what did you do that was like, holy crap, I love that idea. I love the way you combine these colors. I love your use of colors. Wow, I wouldn't even thought of that. To me, that's like, wow, that if I do a wow, I'm looking at it, I'm like, there's bing, 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 extra points. If I go, wow, that's the wow factor. If you can hit that wow with the judges, I think that's really what you're looking for. So be daring, be intentional, but be daring and take chances. What would you like to add on, Jen, with your sense of intention? You've already checked the box with quality addition. So what else can you pile on there?
Well, I guess one of the questions that I see people ask a lot, outside of contrast and outside of style issues and things like that, is for a competition piece, do I have to add something special? Do I have to have the freehand? Do I have to have the OSL? Do I have to have that in order to be considered for a higher level medal or a higher level prize? And I guess my answer to that question would be, because there's a risk there to adding a more complicated technique, or a technique that maybe you aren't as confident in, versus oh, hello. Thank you, Kitty. Something.
Kitty has opinions about this topic.
Yes.
Kitty has opinions. You know, do you take the risk of adding that extra little thing, but maybe risk bringing down the quality of your piece if you can't pull it off as well as you've been able to do your overall blending or whatever? And I don't think there's an easy answer to that question, but I can say that I have seen pieces where, you know, adding the extra little bit really brought the whole thing together and made a difference. I've seen pieces where adding the extra little bit did bring it down, and I've won with pieces where I didn't do anything special. So no easy answers on that one.
No, there's not. There's a lot of variables. And
there's a flip side to that too.
Yeah.
If you're doing the special thing, don't put all your energy on the special thing, like consistency counts.
Mm-hmm.
So if the OSL is amazing, but like you barely painted the floor or something, like we're going to notice that.
Yeah.
And then the one thing I forgot to mention, and this comes up a lot, I think when people are asking for critique and advice after the show, they'll be like, what can I do to get better? And we allow everything. We've had dumpsters, we've had bookshelves, rats, skeletons. Like it's a very open, and I don't even mean just Reaper figures, because our contest, we had someone who did like dragon puppets and they were freaking amazing. That was like one of my favorite things that year.
Yeah.
But a lot of times for painters in particular, we'll get something like it's a skeleton or it's a rat or a mummy. It's like there's really only one or two textures on that thing.
Right.
You can't start winning silvers and golds with like, I could paint one of those and I would hope that no one would ever give me a gold for it, because you just aren't showing us enough stuff. Like it's just one color, it's just one texture. Mm-hmm. Part of the thing with painters, with the idea of the craft, is you have to show us you can do multiple elements of the craft.
No, that's a good point. Model selection
matters.
Yeah, it really does. And I can't give you maybe one of you guys can, but I can't say this is the right model to choose, because it depends. Skeletons probably always going to be the wrong choice. If it's a simple skeleton holding the sword, that's probably, you can probably throw that in the bucket of it won't work. But there's so many other ones that, it depends on your execution of it, depends on how you're combining it with other elements and everything. I think we might be getting towards the end. I saw that Bobby Jackson's been whining the entire time. Ron's
I've seen a lot of sculptor whining, actually, I think. Yeah. For a painter's thing, there's a lot of sculptors.
Okay. Can they hear you, Justin, or just me? All right, cool.
Good.
All right. Anyways, and I see Dave and Ed walking around behind the scenes. That was probably my indication that they're getting ready. Oh, and I wanted to give full credit to Bob. I mentioned that Mark was the one that won with the gold for a mouseling and won a Sophie. Bob did it too. So gotta, give credit to Bob Rodolfi. And then that year that we gave the courtesy Sophie to Bobby Jackson, we need to acknowledge that as well. I
thought he was whining he didn't get a Sophie.
I don't know. Whatever.
But you added the large monster category for Sophie's.
Yes.
Well, it's not Sophie's. It has its own award too. It has its own. Because it's a similar problem to Mouselings. It's not as likely to win a Sophie.
And that was the thing too, with all the Bones awards that were out there, all the Bones awards, Bones Kickstarters, and all the giant monsters are being sculpted. We wanted to encourage the painting of those and bringing those to the cons. But we're towards the end. I want to thank you guys so much. It's been a lot of fun. I still hate this whole virtual con thing. I hate this whole idea. I'm tired of Zoom stuff. I got to do it for work and everything. But this has been a blast. It's been an hour and a half to hang out with some of my best friends. So thank you for that. But hopefully next year we can do. Let's do this panel next year, but let's do it in person.
We've never done panels in person.
Yeah, you've been asking for panels for years, but finally, the powers that be listened for a change, So yeah, it took a pandemic for them to pay attention to you, Rhonda. So anyways.
That sounds about right.
Thanks everybody for watching. 200 people. I think it's the most attendance I may have had and for any kind of Crow's Nest show. So I want to thank you.
Which
for that
you do when? When would they get more of this? But one.
So we have this thing called the Crow's Nest. I'm horrible. It's on Tuesdays at 4 p.m. Central on this Reaper Twitch channel. There won't be one this upcoming Tuesday because it'll be a post-con, but we'll be picking it up again after that. And for you guys that have never watched before, it is kind of like Paint Club, kind of like when we have an artist con. It's me sitting down, pretending I'm painting, talking to one of my friends, somebody in the industry, somebody that we hang out with, and everybody on this panel has been on the show. And I want to appreciate it. Your checks they're in the mail. They probably got lost in delivery at some point for your appearance fee. But yeah, I want to thank you for that too. Anything as we go, I'm running over time, but anything you guys want to pub, Jen? Is there anything you want to talk about? Your awesome blog, your writings on K from our Reaper Errant, our D&D missions. Anything? Your cat?
No, cat is
one of
settled.
several.
Yeah.
Your phone call? Rhonda?
Birdwithabrush.com.
Okay.
You like listening to me drone on about paint stuff.
And what did you just start?
I just started a Patreon.
Yes, please go check out Rhonda's
so I can drone even more.
If you love writing and reading words, Rhonda.
Well, if we get the Patreon going, then I will speak words. Also.
Oh, you're going to speak? Okay.
I'm going to do video version, audio book version, I guess.
There's lots of people on Patreon. There's lots of great things. And Patreon's been a great. But check out Rhonda. She's just starting out, being one of her inaugural members. I don't know if that's the right use of that word.
That is the right use of that word.
But see, you're my wordsmith. But check it out. And Derrick, so what's going on in the world of Derrick?
I have no miniatures related stuff to promote, so go support Rhonda. Watch Michael's show. There are other Reaper's Twitch channel has great programs through the week. And
then they put them on YouTube. So if you miss past Michael's show, you can watch them on YouTube.
Oh yeah, there's that too. So awesome, Justin. Are we ready to wrap up? All right, thanks a lot, guys. And we're wrapping up now, and we're throwing it to the invisible producer.
Thank you guys very much for watching the panel. Thank you guys actually for doing the panel. You guys are fantastic. That was a lot of fun, and it was informative too. Cool. But thank you guys for taking time to do that. Yeah, we're going to go to the We'll Be Right Back screen, and then we'll be back with the Brothers Pugh Squared, here in just a minute.
That's some quality content right there.
Why don't you give everyone a wave, guys? See you guys.
Bye.